up, guys? So that was a little fun, fun there, a little fun here. Um, we're gonna start reading Cien Años de Soledad from starting page. Zona Ganja, the best. Jose, ¿cómo se llama? Jose Gajona, something like that. Let me do a little quick search. Jose Jose Gajona, el cantor de Zona Ganja, man. Fucking dope lyrics, me gusta un chingo. And let's give it a break, and so we can start reading another section of Cien Años de Soledad. So, are you guys ready for that? Don't forget to grab your beer, grab your book, reading and beering. No, guys, but go grab your water, go grab something, and let's practice pronouncing some words in English. Don't worry, I'm still practicing. So this is Mierte podcast number 4, I believe. Last one was only half an hour. I'm aware of that, so that's pretty cool. And yeah, self-sponsored Arte Locura, man. Arte y Locura. And we're gonna start reading in a few, maybe 20 seconds from now. So let me prepare myself mentally and know that I'm gonna get frustrated while reading some words. And but our goal today is to read around. We're just gonna read about like 40 minutes of it. I would say like 20 pages, perhaps. I guess as I read, you guys could notice my tone and my energy, because I really have to go outside and take some fresh air. But go grab your 100 Years of Solitude book and maybe have fun while reading. And yeah, let's try to get this audiobook going. So, and yeah, I'll be back in 20 seconds, so take it easy. Alright, guys, so we're back. Cheers if you have a beer next to you, or una bebida, water, jugo, agua fresca de piña, coco, de todo. Agua de coco tastes bomb anyway. So we're gonna start off on page 41 of 100 Years of Solitude. Again, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And yeah, make this a hobby, I guess, for people who want to listen to an audiobook. And yeah, so let's mute everything that bothers you. And I'm gonna put like a Willy Wonka trip on the background, so I could like imagine myself something. The one that lasted like an hour, so we're gonna be here for a while. It is a challenge, so get ready, guys. So okay, guys, don't worry, I will chief it soon, and I will find the perfect time to do that. But for now, let's read. Excuse me. 100 Years of Solitude, página 41. Comenzamos donde dice Pilar Ternera's son. Oh, excuse me. Pilar Ternera's son. Alright, guys. Again, 100 Years of Solitude, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Let me get my board marker. Then Dr. Seuss. Alright, guys. Alright, let's start this. Cheers. Pilar Ternera's son was brought to his grandparents' house 2 weeks after he was born. Damn. Ursula admitted him grudgingly, conquered once more by the shit, I already having trouble reading this. Obstinacy of her husband, who could not tolerate the idea that an offshoot of his blood should be adrift, but he imposed the condition that the child should never know his true identity. Although he was given the name Jose Cardio, they ended up calling him simply Acardio, so as to avoid confusion. At that time, there was so much activity in the town and so much bustle in the house that the that the care of the children was relegated to a secondary level. Let's read the whole shit again. So sorry, guys. Pilar Ternera's son was brought to his grandparents' house 2 weeks after he was born. Ursula admitted him grudgingly, conquered once more by the obstinacy, there you go, of her husband, who could not tolerate the idea that an offshoot of his blood should be adrift, but he imposed the condition that the child should never know his true identity. Although he was given the name of Jose Acardio, they ended up calling him simply Acardio, so as to avoid confusion. At the time, there was so much activity in the town, and so much bustle in the house, that the care of the children was relegated to a secondary level. They were put in the care of Visitación, a Guajiro Indian woman who had arrived in town with a brother in flight from a plague of insomnia that had been scouring their tribe for several years. They were both so docile and willing to help that Ursula took them on to help her with her household chores. That was how Acardio and Amaranta came to speak the Guajiro language before Spanish, and they learned to drink lizard broth and eat spider eggs without Ursula's knowing it, for she was too busy with a promising business in candy animals. Mocondo had changed. The people who had come with Ursula spread the news of the good quality of its soil and its privileged position with respect to the swamp, so that from the narrow village of past times it changed into an active town with stores and workshops and a permanent commercial route over which the first Arabs arrived with their baggy pants and rings in their ears, swapping glass beads for macaws. Jose Cardio Buendia did not have a moment's rest, fascinated by an immediate reality that came to be more fantastic, than the vast universe of his imagination. He lost all interest in the alchemist's laboratory, put the rest of the material that had become attenuated with months of manipulation, and went back to being the enterprising man of earlier days, when he had decided upon the layout of the streets, the location of the new house, so that no one would enjoy privileges that everyone did not have. He acquired such authority among the new arrivals that foundations were not laid or walls built without his being consulted, and it was decided that he should be the one in charge of the distribution of the land. When the acrobat gypsies returned with their vagabond carnival, transformed now into a gigantic organization of games of luck and chance, they were received with great joy, for it was though that Jose Cardio would be coming back with them. But Jose Cardio did not return, nor did they come with the snake man, who, according to what Ursula thought, was the only one who could tell them about their son. So the gypsies were not allowed to camp in the town or set foot in the future. Excuse me, I thought I said furniture. Let's read that sentence again. But Jose Cardio did not return, nor did they come with the snake man, who, according to what Ursula thought, was the only one who could tell them about their son. So the gypsies were not allowed to camp in town or set foot in it in the future, for they were considered the beer bearers of concu- concupiscence and perversion. Now that's a word. Jose Cardio Buendia, however, was explicit in maintaining that the old tribe of Melquiades, who had contributed so much to the growth of the village with his age-old wisdom and his fabulous inventions, would always find the gates open. But Melquiades' tribe, according to what the wanderers said, had been wiped off the face of the earth because they had gone beyond the limits of human knowledge. Emancipated for the moment, at least, from the torment of fantasy, Jose Cardio Buendia in a short time set up a system of order and work which allowed for only one bit of license. Listens? I think listens. The freeing of the birds, which, since the time of the founding, had made time merry with their flutes, and installing in their place musical clocks in every house. There were wondrous clocks made of carved wood, which the Arabs had traded for macaws, and which Jose Cardio Buendia had synchronized with such precision that every half hour the town grew merry with the progressive chords of the same song until it reached the climax of a noontime that was that was as exact and unanimous as a complete waltz. It was also Jose Cardio Buendia who decided during those years that they should plant almond trees instead of acacias on the streets, and who discovered without ever revealing it a way to make them live forever. Many years later, when Mocondo was a field of wooden houses with zinc roofs, the broken and dusty almond trees still stood on the oldest streets, although no one knew who had planted them. While his father was putting the town in order and his mother was increasing their wealth with her marvelous business of candied little roosters and fish, which left the house twice a day strung along sticks of balsa wood, Aureliano spent interminable hours in the abandoned laboratory, learning the art of silverwork by his own experimentation. He had shot up so fast that in a short time the clothing left behind by his brother no longer fit him, and he began to wear his father's. But Visitacion had to sew pleats in the shirts and darts in the pants because Aureliano had not acquired the corpulence of the others. Adolescence had taken away the softness of his voice and made him listen. Let's try that sentence again. Adolescence had taken away the softness of his voice and had made him silent and definitely solitary. But, on the other hand, it had restored the intense expression that he had in his eyes when he was born. He concentrated so much on his experiments in silverwork that he scarcely left the laboratory to eat. Worried over his inner withdrawal, Jose Cardio Buendia gave him the keys to the house and a little money, thinking that perhaps he needed a woman. But Aureliano spent the money on muriatic acid to prepare some aqua regia, and he beautified the keys by planting them with gold. His excesses were hardly comparable to those of Arcadio and Amaranta, who had already begun to get their second teeth and still went about all day clutching at the Indians' cloaks, stubborn in their decision not to speak Spanish, but the Guajiro language. You shouldn't complain. So we're flipping over to 44. You shouldn't complain, Ursula told her husband. Children inherit their parents, children inherit their parents' madness. And as she was lamenting her misfortune, convinced that the wild behavior of her children was something as fearful as a pig's tail, Aureliano gave her a look that wrapped her in the atmosphere of uncertainty. Somebody is coming, he told her. Ursula as she did whenever he made a prediction, tried to break it down with her housewifely logic. It was normal for someone to be it was normal for someone to be coming. Dozens of strangers came through Mukondo every day without arousing suspicion or secret ideas. Nevertheless, beyond all logic, Aureliano was sure of his prediction. I don't know who it will be, he insisted, but whoever it is, it's already on the way. That Sunday, in fact, Rebecca arrived. She was only 11 years old. She had made the difficult trip from Manauere, difficult trip from Manaure with some high dealers who had taken on the task of delivering along with the letter to Jose Cardio Buendia, but they could not explain precisely who the person was who had asked the favor. Her entire baggage consisted of a small trunk, a little rocking chair with a small hand-painted flowers, and a canvas sack which kept making a clock 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 sound, where she carried her parents' bones. Well, the letter addressed to Jose Cardio Buendia was given in her the letter addressed to Jose Cardio Buendia was written in very warm terms by someone who still loved him very much in spite of time and distance, and who felt obliged and who felt obliged by a basic humanitarian feeling to do the charitable thing and send him the poor, unsheltered orphan, who was a second cousin of Ursula's and consequently also a relative of Jose Cardio Buendia, although father removed because she was the daughter of that unforgettable friend, Nicanor Ulloa, and his very worthy wife, Rebecca Montiel. May God keep them in His holy kingdom, whose remains the girl was carrying, so that they might be given Christian burial. The names mentioned, as well as the signature on the letter, were perfectly legible, but neither Jose Cardio Buendia nor Ursula remembered having any relatives with those names, nor they know anyone by the name of the sender of the letter, much less the remote village of Manaure. It was impossible to obtain any further information from the girl. From the moment she arrived, she had been sitting in the rocker, sucking her finger and observing everyone with her large, startled eyes without giving any sign of understanding what they were asking her. She wore a diagonally striped dress that had been dyed black, worn by use, and a pair of scaly patent leather boots. Her hair was held behind her ears with bows of black ribbon. She wore a scapular with the images worn away by sweat. And on her right wrist, the fang of a carnivorous animal mounted on the backing of copper as the amulet against the evil eye. Her greenish skin, her stomach, round and tense as a drum, revealed poor health and hunger that were older than she was. But when they gave her something to eat, she kept the plate on her knees without tasting anything. They even began to think that she was a deaf mute, until the Indians asked her in their language if she wanted some water, and she moved her eyes as if she recognized them, and said yes with her head. They kept her because there was nothing else they could do. They decided to call her Rebecca, which according to the letter was her mother's name, because Aureliano had the patience to read to her the names of all of the saints, and he did not get a reaction from any one of them. Since there was no cemetery in Mocondo at that time, for no one had died up till then, they kept the bag of bones to wait for a worthy place of burial. And for a long time, it got in the way of, and for a long time it got in the way everywhere and would be found where least expected, always with its clucking of a brooding hen. A long time passed before Rebecca became incorporated into the life of the family. She would sit in her small rocker sucking her finger in the most remote corner of the house. Nothing attracted her attention except the music of the clocks, which she would look for every half hour with her frightened eyes, as if she hoped to find it someplace in there. They could not get her to eat for several days. No one understood why she had not died of hunger until the Indians, who were aware of everything, for they went ceaselessly about the house on their stealthy feet, discovered that Rebecca only liked to eat the damp earth of the courtyard and the cake of whitewash what that she picked that she picked off the walls with her nails. It was obvious that her parents, or whoever had raised her, had scolded her from the habit because she did it secretively and with a feeling of guilt, trying to put away supplies so that she could eat when no one was looking. From then on, they put her under an implacable watch. They threw cow gal on the courtyard and rubbed hot chili on the walls, thinking they could defeat her pernicious vice with those methods. But she showed such signs as astuteness, and ingenuity to find some earth that Ursula found herself forced to use more drastic methods. She put some orange juice and rhubarb into a pan that she left in the dew all night, and gave her the dose the following day on an empty stomach. Although no one had told her that it was the specific remedy for the vice of eating earth, she thought that any bitter substance in the empty stomach would have to make the liver react. Rebecca was so rebellious and strong in spite of her frailness that they had to tie her up like a calf to make her swallow the medicine. And they could barely keep back her kicks or bear up under the strange hieroglyphics that she altered with her bites and spitting, and that, according to what the scandalized Indian said, were the vilest obscenities that one could ever imagine in their language. When Ursula discovered that, she added whipping to the treatment. It was never established whether it was the rhubarb or the beatings that had effect, or both of them together. But the truth was that in a few weeks Rebecca began to show signs of recovery. She took part in the games of Accardio and Amaranta, who treated her like an older sister, and she ate heartily, using the utensils properly. It was soon revealed that she spoke Spanish with such fluency as the Indian language, that she had remarkable ability for manual work, and that she could sign the waltz of the clocks with some very funny words that she herself had invented. It did not take long for them to consider her another member of the family. She was more affectionated to Ursula than any of her own children had been, and she called Arcadio and Amaranta brother and sister, Aureliano uncle, and Jose Arcadio Buendia grandpa, so that they finally deserved, as much as the others, the name of Rebecca Buendia. Whoa. The only one that she ever had, and that she bore with dignity into her death. One night, about the time that Rebecca was cured of the vice of eating earth and was brought to sleep in other children's room, the Indian women who slept with them awoke by chance and heard a strange intermittent sound by the corner. She got up in alarm, thinking that an animal had come into the room, and then she saw Rebecca in the rocker, sucking her finger, and with her eyes lighting up in the darkness like those of a cat. Terrified, exhausted by her fate, Visitacion recognized in those eyes the symptoms of the sickness whose threat had obliged her and her brother to exile themselves forever from an age-old kingdom where they had been prince and princess. It was the insomnia plague. Kataur, the Indian, was gone from the house by morning. His sister stayed because her fatalistic heart told her that. All right, let me take a quick break. Let me take a zip, man. So we're in the last paragraph on page 47. So we're gonna take a zip, maybe take a hit, and continue the process of reading the book. So yeah, so far so good. I think I'm not cursing as much as I did last time, but it just takes practice. So cheers. Just stretching. And all right, let's get back to it. I'm not even sure how to pronounce that word as Kataure or Katauri. Katauri, I'm not sure. Katauri, the Indian, was gone from the house by morning. His sister stayed because her fatalistic heart told her that that the sickness would follow her no matter what to the furthest corner of the earth. No one understood Visitacion's alarm. If we don't ever sleep again, so much the better, Jose Cardo Buendia said in good humor. That way, we can get more out of life. But the Indian woman explained that the most fearsome part of the sickness of insomnia was not the impossibility of sleeping, for the body did not feel any fatigue at all, but its inexorable evolution toward a more critical manifestation, a loss of memory. She meant that when the sick person became used to his state of vigil, the recollection of his childhood began to be erased from his memory. Then the name and notion of things, the identity of people, and even the awareness of his own being, until he sank into a kind of idiocy that had no past. Jose Cardio Buendia, dying with laughter, thought that it was just a question of one of the many illnesses invented by the Indians' superstitions. But Ursula, just to be safe, took the precaution of isolating Rebecca from the other children. After several weeks, when Visitacion's terror seemed to have died down, Jose Cardio Buendia found himself rolling over in bed, unable to fall asleep. Ursula, who had also awakened, asked him what was wrong, and he answered, "I'm thinking about Prudencio Aguilar again." That's the guy Prudencio Aguilar, that's the guy he threw him with the spear because he lost the cockfight. They did not sleep. Let's go over that paragraph again. After several weeks, when Visitacion's terror seemed to have died down, Jose Cardio Buendia found himself rolling over in bed, unable to fall asleep. Ursula, who had also awakened, asked him what was wrong, and he answered, "I'm thinking about Prudencio Aguilar again." They did not sleep a minute. But the following day, they felt so rested that they forgot about the bad night. Aureliano committed with surprise at lunchtime that he felt very well in spite of the fact that he had spent the whole night in the lavatory gilding a brooch that he planned to give Ursula for her birthday. They did not become alarmed until the third day, when no one felt sleepy at bedtime, and they realized that they had gone more than 50 hours without sleeping. Damn, 50 hours without sleeping, that's crazy. Oh, damn. Excuse me. The children are awake too, the Indian said with her fatalistic conviction. Once it gets into the house, no one can escape the plague. They had indeed contracted the illness of insomnia. Ursula, who had learned from her mother the medicine value of plants, prepared and made them all drink a brew of monkhoods, but they could also not get to sleep and spent the whole day dreaming on their feet. In that state of hallucinated lucidity, not only did they see the image of their own dreams, but they saw the images dreamed by others. Whoa, I gotta try that. That's crazy. Let me try to read that again. Okay, so let's go over. The children are awake too, the Indian said with her fatalistic conviction. Once it gets into the house, no one can escape the plague. They had indeed contracted the illness of insomnia. Ursula, who had learned from her mother the medicine value of plants, prepared and made them all drink a brew of monkshood, or monkshood, or monkshood, I think. But they could not get to sleep. And spent the whole day dreaming on their feet. In the state of hallucinated lucidity, not only did they see the images on their own dreams, but some saw the images dreamed by others. It was as if the house were full of visitors, sitting and rugged in the corner of the kitchen. Rebecca dreamed that of a man who looked very much like her, dressed in white, lined and linened, and with his short collar closed by a good button. Excuse me, I'm getting carried away. Okay, let's try again. Rebecca dreamed that a man who looked very much like her, dressed in white linen and with his shirt collar closed by a gold button, was bringing her a bouquet of roses. He was accompanied by a woman with delicate hands who took out one rose and put in his child's hair. Ursula understood that the man and woman were Rebecca's parents, but even though she made a great effort to recognize them, she confirmed her certainty that she had never seen them. In the meantime, through an oversight that Jose Cardo Buendia never forgave himself for, the candy animals made in the house were still being sold in town. Children and adults sucked with delight on the delicious little green rooster of insomnia. The exquisite pink fish of insomnia and the tender yellow ponies of insomnia. So that dawn on Monday found the whole town awake. No one alarmed at first. On the contrary, they were happy and not sleeping because there was so much to do in Mocondo in those days that there was barely enough time. They worked so hard that soon they had nothing else to do, and they could be found at 3 o'clock in the morning with their arms crossed, counting the notes in the waltz of the clock. Those who wanted to sleep, not from fatigue but because of the nostalgia for dreams, tried all kinds of methods of exhausting themselves. They would gather together to converse endlessly, to tell over and over for hours on end the same jokes, to complicate to the limits of exasperation the story about the Capone, which was an endless game in which the narrator asked if they wanted him to tell them the story about the Capone. And when they answered yes, the narrator would say that he had not asked them to say yes, but whether they wanted him to tell them the story about the Capone, Capon. And when they answered no, the narrator told them that he had not asked them to say no, but whether they wanted him to tell them the story about the Capon. And when they remained silent, the narrator told them that he had not asked them to remain silent, but whether they wanted him to tell them the story about the Capone. And no one could leave because the narrator would say that he had not asked them to leave, but whether they wanted him to tell them the story about the Capone, and so on, and on in a vicious circle that lasted entire nights. Che autor se la está mamando. When Jose Cardio Buendia realized that the plague had invaded the town, he gathered together the heads of the families to explain to them what he knew about the sickness of insomnia. and they agreed on methods to prevent the scourge from spreading to other towns in the swamp. That was why they that was why they took the bells off the goats, bells that the Arabs had swapped them for macaws, and put them at the entrance of the town at the disposal of those who would not listen to the advice and entreaties of the sentinels and insisted on visiting the town. All strangers who passed through the streets of Mokondo at that time had to ring the bell. Excuse me, let's try that. All strangers who passed through the streets of Mokondo at that time had to ring their bells so that the sick people would know that they were healthy. They were not allowed to eat or drink anything during their stay, for there was no doubt but the illness was transmitted by mouth, and all food and drink had been contaminated by Nzania. In that way, they kept the plague restricted to the perimeter of the town. So effective was the quarantine that the day came when the emergency situation was accepted as a natural thing, and life was organized in such a way that work picked up its rhythm again, and no one worried any more about the useless habit of sleeping. It was Aureliano who conceived the formula that was to protect them against loss of memory for several months. He discovered it by chance. An expert in Zoniac, having been one of the first, he had learned the art of silverworks to perfection. One day he was looking for the small anvil and that he used for lamenting metals, and he could not remember its name. His father told him, "Steak." Aureliano wrote the name on a piece of paper that he pasted to the base of the small anvil. Steak. In that way, he was sure of not forgetting it in the future. It did not occur to him that this was the first manifestation of a loss of memory, because the object had a very, very difficult name to remember. But a few days later, he discovered that he had trouble remembering almost every object in the laboratory. Then he marked them with their respective names so that all he had to do was read the inscriptions in order to identify them. Then his father told him about his alarm at having forgotten even the most impressive happenings of his childhood. Aureliano explained his method to him, and Jose Cardio Buendia put it into practice all through the house, and later on imposed it on the whole village. With an ink brush, he marked everything with its name: table, chair, clock, door, wall, bed, pan. He went to the corral and marked the animals and plants: cow, goat, pig, hen, cassava, caladium, banana. Little by little, studying the infinite possibilities of a loss of memory, he realized that the day might come when things would be recognized by their inscriptions, but that no one would remember their use. Then he was more explicit. The sign that he hung on the neck of the cow was exemplary proof of the way in which the inhabitants of Mokondo were prepared to fight against loss of memory. This is the cow. She must be milked every morning so that she will produce milk. And the milk must be boiled in order to be mixed with coffee to make coffee and milk. Thus they went on living in a reality that was slipping away, momentarily captured by words, but which would escape irremediably when they forgot the values of the written letters. At the beginning of the road into the swamp, they put up a sign that said Mokondo in capital letters, and another larger on one of the and larger one on the main street that said God exists. And all that the house's keys, memorizing objects and feelings had been written. But the system demanded so much vigilance and moral strength that many succumbed to the spell of an imaginary reality. one invented by themselves, which was less practical for them but more comforting. Excuse me. Pilar Ternera was the only one who contributed most the popularized that mystification when she conceived the trick of reading the past in cards as she had read the future before. By means of that recourse in excuse me, by means of that recourse the insomniacs began to live in the world built on the uncertain alternatives of the cards, where a father was remembering where a father was remembered faintly as the dark man who had arrived at the beginning of April, and a mother who was remembered only by only remembered only as the dark woman who wore a gold ring on her left hand, and where a birth date was reduced to the last Tuesday on which a lark sang in the laurel tree. Damn, this guy's writing is getting me up. Defeated by those practices of consolation, Jose Cardio Bondia then decided to build the memory machine that he had desired once in order to remember the marvelous inventions of the gypsies. The artifact was based on the possibility of reviewing every morning from beginning to end. The totality of knowledge acquired during one's life. He conceived of it as a spinning dictionary that a person placed on the axis could operate by means of a lever, so that in very few hours there would pass before his eyes the notions most necessary for life. He had succeeded in writing almost 14,000 entries when along the road from the swamp a strange-looking old man with a sad sleeper's belt appeared, carrying a bulging suitcase tied with a rope and pulling a cart covered with black cloth. He went straight to the house of Jose Cardio Buendia. Visitacion did not recognize him when she opened the door, and she thought he had come with the idea of selling something, unaware that nothing could be sold in a town that was sinking irrevocably in the quicksand of forgetfulness. He was a decrepit man. He was a decrepit man again. Although his voice was also broken by uncertainty, and his hands seemed to doubt the existence of things, it was evident that he came from the world where men could still sleep and remember. Jose Cardio Buendia found him sitting in the living room, fanning himself with a patched black hat as he read with compassionate attention the signs pasted to the walls. He greeted him with a broad show of affection, afraid that he had known him to another time, that he did not remember him now. But the visitor was aware of his falseness. He felt himself forgotten, not with the irremediable forgetfulness of the heart, but with a different kind of forgetfulness, which was more cruel and irrevocable, and which in which he knew very well because it was the forgetfulness of death. Then he understood. He opened the suitcase crammed with indecipherable objects, and from among them he took out a little case with many flasks. He gave Jose Cardio Buendia a drink of a gentle colored, and the light went on in his memory. His eyes became moist from weeping even before he noticed himself in an observed living room where objects were labeled, and before he was ashamed of the solemn nonsense written on the walls, and even before he recognized the newcomer with a dazzling glow of joy. Okay, let me put my what's it called? The music I was listening to earlier, because it kind of did help focus on what I was reading. Alright. It was Melquiades. While Moconde was celebrating the recovery of its memory, Jose Cardio Buendia and Melquiades dusted off their old friendship. The gypsy was inclined to stay in the town. He already had been through death, but he had returned because he could not bear the solitude. Repudiated by his tribe, all repudiated by his tribe, having lost all of his supernatural faculties because of his faithfulness to life. He decided to take refuge in the corner of the world which has still not had. I'm just making up shit right now. I apologize for that word. He decided to take refuge in the corner of the world which has still not been discovered by death, dedicated to the operation of a daguerreotype laboratory. Daguerreotype? Damn, that's a weird word. Laboratory. Jose Cardio Buendia had never heard of that invention, but when he saw himself as his whole family fastened onto the sheet of iridescent metal for an eternity, he was mute with stupefaction. Alright, let's read that sentence again. Jose Cardio Buendia had never heard of that invention, but when he saw himself and his whole family fastened on the sheet of iridescent metal for an eternity, he was mute with stupefaction. Damn, I'm just reading like with no rhythm, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes reading, you gotta read it with rhythm sometimes, I guess. I don't know, that's just me, but let's keep going. That was the date of the oxidized daguerreotype, in which Jose Cardio Buendia appeared with his bristly and graying hair, his cardboard collar attached to his shirt by a copper button, and an expression of startled solemnity, who Ursula described dying with laughter as a frightened general. Jose Cardio Buendia was in fact frightened on that clear December morning when the daguerreotype. Damn, I gotta learn how to say that word. Let me mark it down. For he was thinking that people were slowly wearing away while his image would endure on a metallic plate. Through a curious reversal of custom, it was Ursula who got the idea out of his head. As it was also she who forgot her ancient bitterness and decided that Melquiades would stay on in the house, although she never permitted them to make a daguerreotype of her because, according to her very words, she did not want to survive as the laughing stock for her grandchildren. That morning she dressed the children in their best clothes, powdered their faces, and gave a spoonful of marrow syrup to each one so that they would remain absolutely motionless during the nearly 2 minutes in front of Melquiades' fantastic camera. In the family daguerreotype, the only one that ever existed, Aureliano appeared dressed in black velvet between Amaranta and Rebecca. He had the same languor and same clairvoyant look that he would have years later as he faced the firing squad. But he still had not sensed the premonition of his fate. He was an expert silversmith. I guess a silversmith. I guess someone who produces silver for. That just like, I think they like just create like they manufacture silversmith. They melt silver and create stuff out of silver. I think. I'm not sure. Praise. He was an expert silversmith. Trying to be intellectual and stuff. Nah. Okay, let's keep going. He was an expert silversmith, praised all over the swamp. What? Swampland for the delicacy of his work. In the workshop, which he shared with Melquiades' mad laboratory, he could barely be heard breathing. He seemed to be taking refuge in some other time, while his father and the gypsies with shouts interpreted the predictions. The predictions of Nostradamus amidst a noise of flask and trace and the disaster of spilled acids and silver bromide that was lost in the twists and turns it gave at every instant, the dedication to his work, the good judgment with which he directed his attention, had allowed Aureliano to earn in a short time more money than Ursula had with her decisions candy fauna. But uh, everybody thought it strange that he was now a full-grown man and had not known a woman. It was true that he had never had one, excuse me. Several months later saw the return of Francisco, the man, an ancient vagabond. I guess that's vagabond is like vagabundo, I'm not sure. An ancient vagabond who was almost 200 years old and who frequently passed through Mocondo distributing songs that he composed himself. In them, Francisco the man told in great detail the things that had happened in towns along his route, from manure to the edge of the swamp, so that if anyone had a message to send or an event to make public, he would pay him 2 cents to include it in his repertory. That was how Ursula learned of the death of her mother, as a simple consequence of listening to the songs in the hope that they would say something about her son Jose Acadio. Francisco the man called that because he had once defeated the devil in a duel of improvisation, and whose real name no one knew, disappeared from the condo during the insomnia plague, and one night he reappeared suddenly in Catarino's store. The whole town went to listen to him to find out what had happened in the world. On that occasion, they arrived with him a woman who was so fat. Excuse me, let me reread that again. On that occasion, there arrived him with a woman that was so fat that 4 Indians had to carry her in the rocking chair, and an adolescent mutalo girl with a forlorn look who protected her from the sun with an umbrella. Aureliano went to the Catarino store that night. He found Francisco the man like a monolithic chameleon. Well, I don't know why I'm reading in Spanish. Sitting in the midst of a circle of bystanders. He was sitting the news with his old, out of tune voice, accompanying himself with the same archaic, 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 accordion that Sir Walter Raleigh had given him in the Ganias, and keeping time with his great walking feet that were cracked from saltpetre. Well, that was a weird sentence. Okay, let's read it again. He found Francisco the man like a monolithic chameleon, sitting in the midst of a circle of bystanders. He was singing the news with his old, out-of-tune voice, accompanying himself with the same archaic accordion that Sir Walter Raleigh had given him in the Guianas, and keeping time with his great walking feet that were cracked from saltpetre. In front of the door, at the rear through which men were going and coming, the matron of the rocking chair was sitting and fanning herself in silence. Catarino, which a felt rose behind his ear, was selling the gathering mugs of fermented cane juice, and he took advantage of the occasion to go over to the men and put in his hand. Oh crap! Excuse me, guys. I'm gonna go over to the Catarinos where it says Catarino with a felt rose, and I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna take a zip, go grab another beer, because it's beer reading and beering, I think. Is that even a word? So I'll be back like around like another like 10 maybe to 30 seconds, I don't know, but this is I'll be back, guys. Oh, I'm back, but cheers, guys. We're almost gonna wrap up this joint, the reading session. So let's keep going, guys. Gonna stop at let's see, we stop at page 50. Let's go to 57. We stop right there. All right, guys. So let's keep going. Catarino, with a felt rose behind his ear, was selling the gathering mugs of fermented cane juice, and he took advantage of the occasion to go over to the men and put his hand on them where he should not have. Towards midnight, and the heat was unbearable. Aureliano listened to the news to the end without hearing anything that was of interest to his family. He was getting ready to go home when the matron signaled him with her hand. "You gone in too?" she told him. "It only costs us 20 cents." I thought it said 22. "It only costs us 20 cents." Aureliano threw a coin into the hopper that the matron had in her lap and went into the room without knowing why. The adolescent mulatto girl with her small bitch teeth was naked on the bed. Before Aureliano, 63 men had passed through the room that night. From being used to much needed with sweat and science. The air in the room had begun to turn to mud. The girl took off the soaked sheet and asked Aureliano to hold it by one side. It was as heavy as a piece of canvas. They squeezed it, twisted it at the ends until it regained its natural weight. They turned over the mat and the sweat came out of the other side. Aureliano was anxious for the operation never to end. He knew the theoretical mechanics of love, but he could not stay on his feet because of the weakness of his knees. Although he had goose pimples on his burning skin, he could not resist the urgent need to expel the weight of his bowels. When the girl finished fixing up the bed and told him to get undressed, he gave her a confused explanation. "They made me come in. They told me to throw 20 cents into the hopper and hurry up." The girl understood his confession. The girl understood his confusion. "If you throw in 20 cents more when you go out, you can stay a little longer," she said softly. Aureliano got undressed, tormented by shame, unable to get rid of the idea of his nakedness, could not stand comparison with that of his brother. In spite of the girl's effort, he felt more and more indifferent and terribly alone. "I'll throw in another 20 cents, he said with a desolate voice. The girl thanked him in silence. Her back was raw, her skin was tucked to her ribs, and her breathing was forced because of an unmeasurable exhaustion. 2 years before, far away from there, she had fallen asleep without putting out the candle, and had awakened surrounded by flames. The house where she lived with the grandmother who had raised her was reduced to ashes. Since then, her grandmother carried her from the town to town, putting her to bed for 20 cents in order to make up the value of the burned house. According to the girl's calculations, she still had 10 years of 70 men per night, because she also had to pay the expenses of the trip and food for both of them, as well as the pay of the Indians who carried the rocking chair. When the matron knocked on the door the second time, Aureliano left the room without having done anything, troubled by the desire to weep. Okay, guys, so we're gonna wrap it there, and that was page 57. We're gonna stop here, and I guess that sounded like people will walk in and see her the way she is, and I'm not even sure that that's the idea that I'm getting. But how about we just drop it and enjoy the last of the beer, and I don't know, man. Maybe Pakugo to be comfortable enough to continue the session. Alright, that was a couple of pages of Years of Solitude. It's pretty cool. I think I said like a few less than 10 bad words. Sorry guys, but cheers. I can't really say much, but keep drinking and just enjoying the moment, I guess. I guess one of the coolest things that you could be doing while like someone reads to you is to picture it, right? Start picturing like everybody has a different ways of picturing a scene in their minds, man. There is this one book that I used to read, and every time I read it, every time I read it, I always pictured like a desert with like a wooden fence, like half-ass wooden fence, like to keep horses from jumping over it. Not too high, but you know, like small ponies and stuff. But it's I don't know. Every time I read like a book that describes such scenery, I always just like get this image of that same house, the same desert of every freaking book. Like I don't know why. It's like it's a weird trip, but it's pretty cool that you get the same memory and you remember what book brings the same memory to your mind, and that's pretty tight. So far this book's bro. This is like the first time I've read actually some of the book. That's pretty cool. I mean, I'm like, I don't want to say I'm like halfway done, because sometimes when you say that, you're gonna end up not reading the book. But doing this my Mi Arte podcast is like helping out to read a book, you know. So if you have the same book that I do and you want to read along, hit me up. Maybe we could like, I don't know, set up like, oh, take turns. You read that section, I read that section, record it, and then just put it up on the podcast or whatever. I also had another idea of having like a phone conversation podcast. That would have been dope, but like no video, just like the audio, because like there are like such apps to record like certain phone calls, so that's pretty cool. And oh yeah, so I was singing Sona Ganja earlier, just to like cool off, you know, to call out some certain I guess like audiences out there, you know, to make them, I don't know what I'm saying, but that was Sona Ganja. I forgot what song it was. I need to go back and look up the song so you guys could like listen into. I might end up this podcast with like or the audiobook with a track every time. I already have this track in mind. So if I search up los ¿qué? It started with los. They sing like oldies. It's los ponchos. Yeah, los ponchos. There's this one song called Sabor a Mi. That's a pretty cool song, man, and I'm gonna end up wrapping up the whole podcast with that song. So just like a small bit, so you guys could go back and like listen to the whole track, or like get yourself excuse me, some good memories in your mind, you know. So I'm gonna pretty much end up doing that. So I already have it load up. So, and yeah, guys, thank you for listening. That was certain pages to certain pages, and maybe next time we will continue it. So hope you guys enjoy it. Peace out, guys.